Hello, Lizzie here. Today we're going to make Dixie, and Dixie is the most beautiful little, I wouldn't call it a quilt, it's more like a mat, which there's lots of different uses for, which I'll talk through as we go through the actual pattern making. But this is the pattern that you'll see on my website, so it's a downloadable PDF pattern on lizzycurtis.com. So let's just pop that to one side. So what does Dixie look like? Well, there she is. There she is, and she's got some quilting on. I don't know if you can see it. She's got some quilting on there, just a minimal amount. It can yes, you can just see it if I tip it a bit. But she's made up of, actually this one's made up of gorgeous Liberty fabrics. The one we're going to make up is actually little animals, because I thought it'd be quite nice for a baby's room, just as a little mat for getting outside of bed, things like that. But it could go in the hallway, in the bathroom. There's lots of different places that this sort of thing could go. It could be something that you put on the worktop to put your hot pans on, something like that. But it's a nice little make, something that you could actually enlarge, make bigger. So it's kind of like, it's doable for me, but you can make it your design by making it bigger, making it into a big size quilt, or just doubling it up. Perhaps you can make it into a big floor cushion if you double it up. But I'm going to talk you through each step of the way of making Dixie, and I think she's great. If you fold her in half, like this, there we go, and you stitch down both of these side seams there and add a couple of handles, that would take your cutting mat and your ruler and your rotary cutter and all those things that you might take when we can in 2021, 2022 into workshops. And then you can have it as your carry bag. Take it to your local craft fairs and events where you can pick up all your fabrics, and certainly that would all go in there. And actually you could make these into pockets if you wanted to, but it's just another idea that you could actually create Dixie into a bag. So she's actually quite versatile. At first glance, yes, she's a nice, easy, simple quilt to put together, or quilt top, patchwork top, whatever you want to call it. But actually from there it might give you the inspiration to do so much more. So we'll pop Dixie to one side. Let's pop her over there, keep her safe. So the fabric I'm using, like I said, is the most gorgeous little animal prints, and it's navy blue and white. And there's my top already made. I've kind of fussy cut some of these pieces out so it'll look quite nice. So the pattern tells you all about the sizes that you need to cut and how many. Okay, so what I've done is I've cut mine, I've stitched them together, and I think that's, you know, if I turn it this way, that's going to be pretty straightforward for you to do and to understand. You don't need to watch me doing that. So the first thing you're doing is creating this panel that goes down the center of your quilt top or your patchwork top, call it what you like. So then what we're going to do is put the borders on, or the sashing. I suppose it's because it's near this part, it's going to be sashing, isn't it? But we're putting it all the way round. Now we're going to put the two short ends on first, press that, and then put the long side pieces on, okay? And I've got the most gorgeous stripy fabric for that. Oh gosh, I hope you can see that. It really works well. So I've kept this, now I've cut these selvage to selvage on my fabric, and I've kept them, so I'm going to do one short side with one piece and a long side, and then a second piece to do the same. Okay, so I'm going to, it looks a bit weird when you first start off because you've got this massive length of fabric. So I'm just going to cut my selvages off. So I'm going to do the short ends first, but one with this long piece and then the other one with this long piece, just to make that clear. Sometimes it's more economical to do that with your fabric. I would say work it out and see what you think's best for you. I'm using solely 1/2 meter lengths of fabric. I find that to be the most sort of versatile of all the cuts. You might find that using fat quarters on this is absolutely perfect. And you could piece some of these pieces together, because they certainly go, they're longer. Some of these pieces are longer than a fat quarter, so you might have to piece. But I always find if I piece with a 45-degree angle, you know, a mitered angle, it's not a mitre angle, a 45-degree angle, then it almost becomes invisible. So there's my first short end applied. I'm just going to pop that to one side. And so there's the first bit. So now I'm going to go to the other end. And again, I'm going to cut my selvages off. Now, never think that if you've cut this, it's that you're wasting anything, because you will have pieces left over. It's the same with anything you create. You know, you always have scrap, but there's always projects that you can put together using your scraps. I never throw anything away. There's always something, a little project, 1/4 inch seam allowance, by the way, before I forget. There's always a little project that you can use these scraps up with. I've been doing some crumb quilting recently, and these are perfect for that because they're strips, so they're easy to stitch. So down to the end, I'm just doing a little back stitch there just to hold that all nicely. I'm just going to pop my iron on while I remember. And then I'm just going to cut and trim that to size. Obviously you can use your rotary cutter, your mat, your ruler, all those tools that we have at our disposal. Of course you can use that, but because I'm using stripy fabric, you know, I've got the guideline of the stripes to help me cut. So just trim your threads. There's always thread trimming to be done there. And all we're going to do is just press those seams so they're nice and neat. I'll just bring my mat up. So you're pushing that seam out that you've just created. And if you can, follow what you've already pressed. So underneath here, all of my seams are going this way. So I'm going to now press the seam the same way. So I'll just pull that slightly just to open that seam up. You can set the seam if you want to, just to embed those stitches in, and just go in there, make sure that that's beautiful. I do love the stripe. I think it's going to be quite fun, this. I have to find somebody to gift it to. So this one, obviously, because we're going all the way along, the seam's going that way, which is nice and easy. I just push the top of my fabric over, and again, do a beautiful pressing job. You can see how lovely and neat that really does look, doesn't it? So I'm going to keep my iron on because we're going to stitch the long sides now. So let's get the end that we cut. And so we're going right sides together with the sashing going down the long sides with our stripes. And like I say, you'll find the fabrics that you like. And there was a bit of a debate whether I should use a red panda fabric. There's some out there that know what I'm talking about. Let's just move all my other bits out of the way. But I've saved that fabric for another project. My favourite colours are blue and white. I do an awful lot of things in blue and white. I have to try and get out of my comfort zone with it. And I think I did with just the little animals. Now when you've put your front panel together, this stripe's going along here, you might want to trim those back just to square them up a bit. You shouldn't be, because it's only one straight seam going across, there shouldn't be much variation at all. As long as you've got your first initial cuts right. So 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way down, with a little back stitch. And this is such an easy make. It really is. I think you know, when you need one of those projects that you don't want to spend huge amounts of time on, but you're getting the satisfaction of making something really pretty and quite quickly, this could be it. Like I say, there's lots of different things you can do with it. And I'm using directional fabric, so that might be something to consider. If, you know, we talked about making it into a bag, you might want to use your directional fabric going one way on one half and then flipping it, so if you did make it into a bag, then the directional fabric would be going the same way both sides of the bag. So sometimes there's a lot more to consider, but I love these little quick easy makes. I'm just making sure as I go along, because I'm stitching, the seams underneath I'm stitching against almost, so they almost want to flip the other way. So I'm just making sure they stay put and sort of keep flicking them where they should be. Doesn't matter how well you press, they'll still want to go the opposite way. There we go. Let's see. Now down to the bottom. There we go. So a little back stitch. Only one or two stitches. You don't need to go mad, but it's it just helps strengthen all of those seams. As you press them, as you work with them, they're going to stay put. So again, let's bring the iron up, and we'll just press those seams. And this time we're just going to push them out. So just put your hand in there and push them away, and then get your iron in there. And because there's no bias in here, if you want to steam at this point, you can, but be careful when steaming, because once steamed, it's almost, well, it pretty is much permanent. With a dry iron, you can, once you've dry ironed, you could actually steam it into shape afterwards if something is not quite right. So dry iron is kind of, it's like your temporary fix in a way. It does the job you need it to do, but a steam will almost certainly fix your design. Pretty difficult to manoeuvre it after you've steamed. Oh, that's lovely. Lovely, lovely, lovely. So you can tell I love navy, white and blue. Oh dear. Right, so there is our stripy border. Looks great, doesn't it? So now we're putting the big border on. So we've got a thin border and we've got a thick border. Now I've cut all my fabric going across from selvage to selvage, because it helps with the directional part of things. You could, if you've got 1/2 metre and you cut that 1/2 metre width, it's not very wide, and bearing in mind that you could go against the direction of the fabric, but if you go selvage to selvage, you're picking up that design all the way along, and you've got a much longer piece of fabric to work with. So bear that in mind. A 1/2 metre is much more versatile than a fat quarter, and a metre is always really a bit too much, especially for small projects like this. So again, I've got 2 pieces. So I've cut selvage to selvage. So the first thing I'm going to do is stitch the short ends again. So keep consistent with that. I'm going to just hand cut my selvages off. And if you can, I mean, I cut selvage to selvage, but if you can, with your fabric, keep some of that selvage on. Now that sounds a strange thing. Also with direction, look out for, in my case it's the little animals. I don't know if you can see, but I want all my animals to go the same way. When we come to the sides, that's not going to happen, but top and bottom, then it's going to follow the direction of all my little animals coming down. So on here I want to make sure that my sheep and my pussycat and my little dog, my bunny rabbit, are all going the same way. So there we are. So this is our big border, a big sashing. Do you call it a border? Do you call it a sashing? In some ways this is a border, in other ways it's a sashing, because we're going to add side pieces to this, which then becomes the border. So I'm just stitching across the short end. Doesn't matter whether you do top or bottom. do one, then do the other, and just line all that up nicely. Come down to where your sashing has finished, and quite honestly, because this is a wide border, this is the time to get your rotary cutter and your ruler in. So I'll just dive over and get my ruler and follow the line of your top piece of quilt. So if I bring that to the side camera, you'll see there's the piece I've just stitched. There's obviously my sashing. So I'm just going to lay my ruler over the top of it, line it up so it's all parallel to my sashing. You could do this, flip it over and do it the other way, but we might as well just do it like this. And then you could just line up, make sure that your pieces, your lines are all consistent with your raw edges, and then just go in and cut. There we go. So we've got one long piece left over, so that's for one of the sides. We'll press this in a second. So going over to the other long piece of fabric. You know, I could give you measurements for you to cut. Now make sure I've got my little animals going the right way. Yep. I could give you measurements to cut, but if you're very, very good with your 1/4 inch seam allowance, it's great. But if you're quite not that accurate yet, if you're still learning to try to be accurate, let's make sure our pussycats are going the same way, yep, you'll end up, your pieces won't be the right size. They could be a little bit smaller or a little bit bigger. So sometimes I much prefer to sort of say it to you this way than to give you exact measurements. Sometimes I think we can beat ourselves up a little bit, be mean to ourselves, because that doesn't fit, and it should do, because the pattern says it should fit and it doesn't. And it lowers our confidence a little bit. Don't want that, do we? Do not want that. So I'm just going to do the same again. I'm laying my border sashing out, and I'm just going to get my ruler in and cut. Just try and keep the lines of the ruler parallel to the lines of the fabric and cut. So now I've got my second long piece. So I'm just going to press these bottom pieces. I suppose that's the other thing, isn't it? Is pressing is key to all of this, especially with patchwork. Same with dressmaking. Now let's see where our seams are going. I think actually this time I'm going to get those seams to go out, because I've already got this sashing here. It kind of naturally wants to go out, so we'll stick to that. Lovely. It's like anything else. If you've made it up in one sort of fabric and then you make it up in a different fabric, you have never seen that before. So it's always a treat for me to see something going together. I certainly don't practice anything with the fabric. I just go with my choices and see. And it's always difficult to know how it's going to look, always. So I'm going to take one of my long pieces now. And like I said to you before, the animals are going to go sort of, they're not going to go down the pieces like we did because of the way this has been cut. So I can make sure I can do one thing, that the animals either face into the quilt top, the panel, or face out. And I think they should face out because they'll take the eye out to the edge. So I'm going to do it so the animals go out. I keep smiling to myself because these are not fabrics that I would go into a shop, pick up and say, oh, I love them. Because I was testing myself. I was choosing things that I knew were out of my comfort zone. But, so it's quite fun for me. I suppose that's a lesson to learn, isn't it? So all the way down. Just get those raw edges together and pin if you need to. Pin if you need to. So you can see how quickly this is coming together. We've just got the outside squares to do. So if you look at the pattern, or if you look at the start of the video, there's strips of squares going down the sides, and that was to make the overall size that little bit bigger and not too narrow a piece, and it gives it a little bit more detail. Good. So just coming down to our last bit. So we just need to make sure when we put the second piece on that our animals are facing, or whatever, flowers, whatever you've decided to use, that they're going in the right direction. So this time, because I've pressed that first strip there, or that's larger piece of border, it's lying really nice and flat, so I can just get my ruler up. Make sure that the lines on my ruler are absolutely parallel to the edges of the fabric. Keeps everything square. And then just cut. That's it. So we've got a little scrap there, but none of that will be wasted. So again, there's one half done. You can see. Doesn't it look lovely? So you can see how my animals look. Their little feet are going towards the inner panel. So that's all we need to remember when we're doing the second piece. Yep. So let's just pop that on. So all I'm going to do is trim this selvage away first. And of course you could do this with your rotary cutter, mat and ruler. But we'll just do this by hand. Sometimes it's quicker for me to do that than get everything out. So let's just move that in a little bit. And we're just going down that long side now, and check again if you need to, just to see if your little animals, or perhaps the trick is not to use directional fabric. But I'm having fun with it. Can you see the bag there? There, that's Delia, and I was kind of challenged myself. I made one with a beautiful William Morris fabric, but then we used some, used some really funky, trendy sort of animal fabric, something you wouldn't perhaps immediately think of for bags, but it's had an incredible response on social media. Instagram has gone crazy with the look of that bag, and I would never have dreamt to have done that. So sometimes going out of your comfort zone is okay. Yeah, so think the opposite. Although clearly I haven't with the blue and white. It's like, do as I do, not as I say. Yeah, okay. So just coming down to that last piece there, little back stitch just to hold that nicely, and then as before, because I've pressed this end here, it's lying lovely and flat, so I'm just going to use my ruler and cut. Beautiful, beautiful. So let's get the iron up again. These are all necessary steps for you to do. That's why we won't cut this piece out, because it's important that you remember to do it, that if you're following along with me, that you do the same as me. I know sometimes it's not so easy to keep up. Appreciate that. I suppose because I know what I'm going to, because it's a pattern I've done before when I created it, I know what's going to happen next, so I have everything lined up ready. I just love this fabric, it's so fun. Sorry, I'll stop talking about it. And I was thinking about quilting. With the original Dixie, I did very geometric quilting because it kind of went with the design, in my opinion. But with this little one, this little Dixie, I'm going to stipple quilt. I won't do that. I'll start it on camera, but I won't finish it on camera because it'll take me, I don't know, a good half an hour to do. You don't want to watch me doing that. So I'll do it off camera and then show you what it looks like. Okay, now this would benefit from a steam, but I'll do that after. So I'll do it before we put the backing, or I'll put the backing on and then I'll steam it just to set all that backing in place. Let's move that out of the way. So there's it so far. Have you ever wondered what the Gold Club is all about? So many people message me, what is the Gold Club? Okay, simply it's my online sewing group, okay, mainly based on Facebook, where we have a bit of a natter every day. We do Facebook Lives and make all sorts of things. But if you go to my website, lizzycurtis.com, you'll see a Join Gold tab on the top there. And all that means is that you click on that, and you buy it. So for £5, which in dollars is about $6.30, depending on exchange rates and times, you will get 3 patterns every month. I know, it's mad. If you look at the price of my patterns in the shop, generally they're now $4.99. The value of the Gold Club online membership at this point in time is just £5 a month. So you're getting the 3 free patterns every month, and they're all made by me, designed for you. Easy, moderate, fairly difficult. Then we have the Facebook to back that up all as well, the Facebook group. So we have a wonderful time in there. We're all great friends. So if you want to join a great online sewing community, join Lizzie's Gold Club. Okay. So the next thing is to do the squares. So if I pick up the original Dixie, you can see top and bottom that we've got those squares. Okay, so that's what we're going to create next. Now it's really easy to do, and in the pattern it shows you the fabrics that you need to cut. It's exactly the same width and length as the stripy panel pieces. And you're going to put 4 of those together as if you were making a panel, and then you're going to cut into them to the required size. Dead easy. So I'm going to the side camera now so you can see these pieces. So this is how you lay them out. You need exactly as if you're going to do the panel, but these are now for the squares. So you've got 4 pieces, exactly the same length and width as the panel pieces, and all you're going to do is stitch those together in succession, and then we've got 3 little pieces to add on to the end. Okay, it all will become clear when I do that for you, but let's just stitch those together. So making sure again that your directional fabric is good. Just 1/4 inch seam allowance, and we'll just quickly stitch these together. Make sure those raw edges are together as well, because that sometimes alters, well, it will alter your accuracy. And then lay them down again, just to make sure that we're still going in the right direction and the right pieces are going together. And then stitch those down. And if you want to pin or clip these together, by all means do that. But the more often you stitch just straight line stitching, the more confident you'll get about doing this kind of freestyle without pinning and clipping. But a lot of these things take a little bit of time to get used to. So let's pop that through. Good. So now let's give that a press. Let's bring the mat up again. And you'll notice that a lot of this is stitching, press, stitching, press. But it's a dry iron. Don't think if I've said the word press I mean steam. I do not. There are moments when your piece can be steamed to set all of those seams. just pull this out slightly, open up your seam that way. You can set the seams if you want to. All of those things are all part of the preparation, and it all helps. I'm going to keep that on just for a moment. Right, so the next part is to actually cut these into squares. So your ruler, rotary cutter mat, and if we look at the side, so there's my 4 pieces together. So I'm just going to square off that end, just neaten that end up. Because we're dealing with quite small squares, it's good to do that. So just take that away. Then go to your pattern, and you're told quite clearly what sizes to cut these squares. So there's your first one. And cut again. Now, of course, you could cut rectangles and make it even wider. You know, the idea is I've given you a head start of what you're going to, how it's going to be put together and what it looks like, but then of course you can make it your own. So we need 5 of these out of those strips. So you'll have about 1/4 inch or so left over. And there we go. Let's try and keep that all square. There we go. So there are our pieces ready for stitching together. So we start off with a white one. So if I bring that down here, we start with a white one, we end with a blue. So we start with a white, end with a blue. So we're joining all those together. So let's just quickly do that. Keep an eye on your animals, or maybe you're not using animals. Keep an eye on your directional fabric. Probably the better thing to say. Not worrying about back stitching now, because all of these pieces have very delicate ends to them where we've cut. So again, just offering up those pieces and stitching. 1/4 inch seam allowance. If it's any different, I'll always tell you. My Augustina bag was 1/2 inch because it's a big bag. The seams need to be strong and robust, but with this sort of thing it's usually 1/4 inch. Even my Delia bag is 1/4 inch. Kind of get into the habit of doing that. So, okay, so now you can give it a press, but we're going to add on a couple of squares here and there. So we've ended with the navy blue, so I'm going to stitch on a little white one. Excuse me. And then a blue. Make sure it's going the same way. And you'll find that these squares match up to your stripes. So this is where you might want to pin, and then at the very top where we started with a white, you're going to add a blue, or whatever your fabric is. You work out what your fabric is. I'll give you a diagram to follow. So there we are. So there's my extra pieces added. So let's just give that a quick iron. Now this should fit quite comfortably down the sides of your pieces, the top that you've made. So make sure all those seams go the same way. So all those joins that we made. And you can see I'm pressing against that seam to make it go out. We don't want any folds or tucks. It's always difficult when you've got a lot of seams now to maintain and keep that accuracy. It is tricky, there's no denying it, but the best thing is to give it a good iron. Let's just switch that off now. So we need to now stitch these onto our little top, so let's pop those out the way. So there's our top. Okay, so we'll start off with, I'm going to start off, let me show you. I'm going to start off on this left hand side, and I'm going to find kind of like the middle one. So I'm going to keep it there so you can just about see it. And because these panels here are an odd number, you will have a middle middle one. Make sure your animal's going, or whatever, going the right way. So that's my middle. So I'm going to do, you can just see that now. Now you can see, look, how those squares match up with your stripes. You don't have to do it that way, but it's quite nice optically. The main thing is to try and get that first one. You could use clips if you want, but I'm going to use pins in this instance. Make sure that first one is pretty central, and then work your way, do half and half. Just get down to that last one, make sure that's about right. I mean, if you can get your ruler and your pen and draw a line and all those sort of things, you might find that more accurate. Time is never on my side, so I'm just going to show you what I would do. So I'm just eyeballing it really. You'll find you have a little bit on each end that you'll need to trim. So let's just level this up. So I'm going right up to the top to my last white one. You can see what I'm doing, and I'm making sure that that is in the right position, because if anything I'm going to notice if that one's out. I'm pretty confident that that's, I'll just move it a wee bit. It's one of those things you have to sort of keep looking at. No, that was fine. And then, so we've got a pin there, we've got a pin in the middle, and then just, it's almost like a concertina that you need to just pull out a little bit. It's all of those seams, that's all it is. So just take that middle one and again do that. So you can quickly do the other side. Again, you'll have a little bit to trim off at the top corner. So again, let's make sure our animals are going the right way. Find the centre. There we go. So again, just get your ruler out if you need to, because once you've stitched together, if it's out a little bit, you may notice and it may irk you. So do the centre one and then bring it out to the end, that last panel, and then you could put a pin in the centre, between that, if you want to, again, and it'll just keep you straight. The other thing is, of course, pop your walking foot on, because that'll keep all your layers going through your machine at the same rate. Again, I'm just pulling that over, making sure that's pretty lined up with this one here, and then I shall pin in the centre. Okay, and again you'll have to trim off a little bits on each end, but it's quite aesthetically pleasing to get those squares pretty much lined up with your centre panel. So the other thing is, if you can, stitch with those seams going in the, so your presser foot meets the seam and goes over it, rather than you have to keep jumping over the raw edge. It's not always possible, but in this case it is quite nice to do that. So 1/4 inch seam allowance. Let's get the pin cushion in. There we go. Just bring those seams together. Just when you get to that next pin, just sort of ease it into the straight edge. Take the pin out, do not stitch over pins, please. I've had one go in my eye when it's broken. It's not pleasant. Unlucky, but not the thing to do at all. And then once we've done these two seams, we're actually now ready for quilting. And like I said to you right at the beginning, I'm going to stipple quilt this, whereas you might think maybe a geometric design is better. I'll leave the quilting part to you guys. Okay, so there's one. Now with this side we're going to go against the seams, because we're going to go that way, and the seams are not friendly, let's say. So I'm going to flip it over, and I'm actually going to stitch from the quilt side, if you like. Let's do it that's it. Let's get it right. So I'm stitching from the quilt side, so my seams are all going down. Again, my pins are on the wrong side, but I can work with that. Again, it's just a case of getting the raw edges to sit together nicely. So just work your way down. Now obviously you might want to pin a lot more than me to get the accuracy that you need. It's important, I think, for you to get it right. I don't want you to get your quick on pick out, seam ripper. So so the next stage is to put the wadding and the backing on the back and sandwich it all together and quilt it. And like I said, I'll start it on camera and then we'll finish it off. I'll come back to you. So like I said, you'll have to trim a little bit off each end. I need to give it a press, which I will do. But that's our squares on. They look good, don't they? Really good. I like it. I love the fabric. It's a fabric, like I said, I would not have chosen, but it's worked out okay. So when you press it, press those seams out. Take a moment for that heat to penetrate the fabric and to work, do its magic. Obviously now you'll want to steam it. So I'm going to show you the back, put the backing on, I'll show you what I'm going to do, and then I'll go away and steam it, and then we'll quilt it. And like I said, I'm just going to do a stipple quilt. Sometimes a stipple quilt is really nice because it makes the project a little bit more dense, not quite so I was going to say fluffy, but that's not quite the right word. It's not so puffy, perhaps. You can put a little bit of quilting in and you've still got the fluidity of the fabric. But if you stipple quilt, you really do bind all those layers together. So just want to do this so you can have a better look at what we've done. And really this doesn't take long. This little mat, which could be a bag, really doesn't take long. It's quite nice. Okay, so like I say, you've got to trim the ends, and I'll do that in a little while. So there we are. I'll hold it up again. It's a better view because we've pressed it. Really nice. Really nice. If you go to my website, lizzycurtis.com, you will see a tab that says Online Workshops. What does that mean, I hear you say? It means that I run online workshops via Zoom, which is really exciting. And pretty much every week, for about 2 or 3 weeks in advance, there's always a workshop to do, definitely on a Sunday afternoon, sometimes in the evening, sometimes midweek, but generally on a Sunday afternoon. It's a great time to meet all your friends, bring cake, bring a cup of tea, and make the most amazing projects with me. Really nice. Really nice. So with the actual backing, so obviously you're going to choose your backing. It takes a half a metre is plenty. I've just used a sort of white on white design, kind of like a grey tone sort of fleck to it. You're never going to see it. So I've put my wadding on already, and actually I do like to press this after the wadding's gone on. And I've made my backing and wadding a lot bigger than my little quilt, my little piece of patchwork. So if I was to hold this up, I'm going to spray adhesive it down, or spray adhere it down, and you can see how that looks. So you can see that the wadding and the backing is a lot bigger. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue this all together. I'm going to steam press it. I'm going to come back to you, do a little bit of quilting, take it away, finish the quilting, and then we'll do the binding together. So I've pressed it all, I've stuck it to my wadding and my backing. I'm really pleased with how it looks. And like I said before, my backing and my wadding is that bit bigger, okay? And really that's just to allow for movement of the quilt top. And if it does move a little bit, it doesn't matter because you've got all that little bit of extra. A couple of inches is always plenty. Mine's a little scrappy, but about a couple of inches. So, got my big table on my machine because it helps support the weight of this little quilt mat. I've got my famous white dancing gloves on. I've also got my feed dogs down. If you don't have that facility, then just put your stitch length on 0. Don't bother putting a darning plate on, not worth it. So just pop your stitch length on 0. I've put silver thread on, we'll see how we go. Some of the machines don't like metallic threads. It's one of those things you've got to play around with. I've kept my regular needle in, but a metallic needle is good as we're using metallic thread. Well, I should be okay. I've got my free motion foot on here. That's the darning or embroidery foot. I've got the open toe because there's nothing to catch it. If I was doing a plique, I'd be using the closed toe. And that's about it, really. You're creating the stitch length. Ideally, you're going to start in the middle, but it's quite a small piece, so I think I'll start right up in the corner here and just work my way. Now, I'm doing stipple quilting, which is quite random. I like stipple quilting, but you might want this to be a little bit more regimented, entirely up to you. So to start off with, because I'm going right from the edge, I'm not going to worry, put the foot down, I'm not going to worry too much about my threads and locking those threads off because I've done it on a piece where I'm going to trim back, okay? So, but normally you'd bring your threads up, you'd tie them off and make them neat. So it's just a case of starting now and being brave. And because it's stipple quilting, it's just a case of moving the fabric. And like I say, you're in charge of the stitch length by moving the fabric. So a nice gentle speed. Hopefully you can hear my machine. Be careful when you come to the edges because if anything that's where it's going to pucker. So sort of creep up to the edge, sort of come back on yourself. And don't forget you've got a seam allowance there, so not everything is lost. And if it does pucker a little bit, then you can always unpick that bit and start again. It's fine. That's the joy of stipple quilting. It's the eye is being moved around the entire piece. I like the silver thread, it's looking really nice. Coming back on myself now. Try not to do lines of waves, of curls, of swirls. Try and sort of alternate it a little bit. Takes a little bit of practice. And normally I would warm up before I did anything like this. So I sort of spend 10 minutes just warming up, getting those shoulders relaxed. Try not to get yourself up a dead end. And just keep moving that fabric around. You might want to do sort of 1/4 of it. And then work your way around. So now I'll leave it there because I'll finish this because this will take me a half an hour to do and you don't want to watch me do that. So I'll go off now, finish this, I'll trim my little quilt top up and then we're ready to put the binding on. So I've done all my stipple quilting, I've trimmed it back, I've given it another little press and there we have the finished sort of little top. And now it's just a case of putting the binding on. I've chosen the stripy fabric for the binding, so it will match up quite nicely with the stripy little bit of sashing there. So start on one of the long sides and start about 8 inches down. So you will have pressed your strip of fabric in half, folded it nicely. So you've got your raw edges this side. So you come down about 8 inches, I'm not measuring, but about there. And that's where you're starting because we need to do a nice mitered finish on this. So I'll just get it under the needle. The needle is my anchor man. It really does make a difference. Just bring the machine in a little bit. So we're going to do mitered corners all the way around. So there's my tail. And do a little back stitch if you want. Put the feed dogs up. Little back stitch if you want. And we're just going to work our way around. And although this is quite a small project, it'll still cover your desk, push things off your desk. I can see things now going to fly off my desk. So come down to that first corner. There's lots of different ways of doing your mitered corners. But you could run right off the end. Got to bear in mind you're doing a 45-degree angle here. So run right off the end. Turn your piece so it's more manageable. Fold that piece back and it will release some of those stitches that you just stitched right off the end. So you're doing a fold like that, so you've got your perfect, can you see? Whoops, let's do it so you can see. So your perfect fold there, and then you're going to flip it back. And there are pictures in the patterns that show you quite clearly what I'm talking about. And then just start stitching from the outside corner. And you could of course give that little back stitch just to secure. And then it's just a case of going around the entire piece. And you're stitching on the front. There are techniques where you can stitch the binding from the back and flip over. I prefer to do it this way. You may want to machine finish the binding, or you may want to hand stitch the binding. There's no rules about what's right and what's wrong. If you're going to exhibit it, you'll want to do probably hand stitching. It shows the skills. So again, it's taking it out, moving everything around so it suits me. Folding up, pulling those stitches a bit so I get that 45-degree, and then fold back. Make sure everything is beautiful. Little back stitch, and away we go again. So we're just coming down that last home straight now, having gone all the way around. And what I want you to do is when you come close to where you started, so this is where I started here. So when you come close, I want you to have another tail of about 8 inches. Measure it if you want, but you just want a little bit of a long tail. And you should have just enough. This is 2 widths of the fabric, so selvage to selvage. So keep coming down. Okay, that'll do. So just for this part here, we need to make a nice mitered finish to our binding. So we just need our measuring ruler. So we've got 2 tails now, you can see here, and we're going to go to the side camera so you can see what I'm going to do. And I want them to overlap by 2.5 inches. Because our binding is 2.5 inches, I want the overlap to be 2.5 inches. So I'm going to cut this binding here, it doesn't matter which side, but I'm going to cut it down to about there. So we've got a little bit of a gap going on there. And this can be adjusted, but you still want them to overlap by 2.5 inches. Okay, so there's one tail. And then with your other tail, just take that across like that. Okay. And you want that part from the end there. So if I move that, oh, it's wrong because I was pointing to the square, not the end. So there's the end of your binding. So from there, you want it to be 2.5 inches along here. Okay. So we could pin it. We could get an erasable pen, whatever. But I'm just going to pin it. So there's the edge of my, I'm going to do it again. There's the edge of my binding just there. If I lift that up, you can see. And where it's 2.5 inches, I'm just going to pop a pin in there. Okay, just get my ruler out of the way. and that's where I'm going to cut, and that overlaps that by 2.5 inches. Okay, so I'm just going to eyeball that. There we go. There we go. So that's our overlap. So if I bring those out, you'll see, and if I flip them back, you'll see. So now what we're going to do is right sides together, open them up. This is why you need fairly long tails, because you're going to open these two pieces up and you're putting right sides together. So let's see if I can do that so you can see. And in the pattern it does quite clearly say what you need to do. So there's my two ends. Open up, and you want to bring your quilt together. And you can pop a pin in just to hold it. Let's do that. A clip is a bit heavy for this, I must admit. And you just really want to make sure that that's sitting nicely into the corner there. Okay, so that's sitting nicely there. You can pop a pin in if you like, but you're going to move it as soon as you start stitching. And then, like I say, you'll want to bring this quilt together. It doesn't want to go together. It will want to keep flattening out, opening out. So there's our two pieces now, right sides together, and you're going to stitch from that corner to that corner, okay, diagonally across. And by all means draw a line, and I think in the pattern it shows you a line that I've drawn and then you're stitching, but I'll just do this by eye. And of course you could put another pin there to secure, because they do want to wriggle. Okay, but don't stitch over those pins. Okay, so that's going to give us the miter corner. Where is it? Lost it. And so stitch, but don't cut. Stitch, and then just make sure your binding does lay flat to your quilt, to your little top. If you didn't leave those long ends, this is the bit where you might struggle. So I'm just coming diagonally across. I'm going to take my pins out, or at least I'm going to take the pin out that's near that corner, and just cut my threads, take the pins out. So this is where you want to open it up, lay it out flat, and make sure that that fits nicely into your gap. If it is a little bit big, then just stitch it again, just take a little bit more off, but that should be a perfect fit. So what I'm going to do is cut it and iron it. I'll get my little mat up. These little wool mats actually my daughter has on her website, Abigail Byrne, and she often has them in stock, but as soon as she has them in stock they go, they just fly out the door. They're lovely. You'll always see me using them. I've got all sorts of shapes and sizes. So again, you want to open that seam up just so you're evenly distributing the fabric. Let's take it all the way across and then just flatten that out. And if you feel that that's a little bit too big, just get those seams together a bit better, then you can alter it. Depends how accurate you measured and cut that 2.5 inches. Let's pop that away. So now it's just a case of closing that gap. Little back stitch just to start you off, and just straighten all that up. And finish stitching. There we go. So the next part is to take sort of just take the binding out. So you'll want to press that, push that binding out, push those corners out. And if you want to trim the corners, by all means do. Give it another steam. I would give it, personally, I would give it another steam. Now, to finish off, there's lots of debate about this recently, is that obviously that's my wrong side. So my binding is going to be pressed so it's standing, proud of that. And you're literally folding it in half. And that fold line here should just go beyond the stitching. So I think I'll show that to you in this camera here. So there's the wrong side. So you're gonna steam that back. You're gonna iron that back so it's beautiful, and then it just touches the stitch line. It kind of it just goes a wee bit beyond. So if I put a quilting clip in there, and you see it just goes a wee bit beyond, but it should be this pretty much the same width on the front as it is on the back. Now, personally, I do love to hand stitch my quilts. Sometimes I don't have time, but I do like to hand stitch. If you want to stitch this with the machine, then stitch it from the right side and try and stitch in that ditch there, in that seam line between the two pieces, and you should just about catch that side there, okay? Like I say, this is up for debate. You could top stitch, so you know you absolutely will get that back piece, but to guarantee a perfect result, this is where you would hand stitch. The other thing you can do, which I absolutely advocate, is to use your quilter's tape. That's what it's for. So you would put quilter's tape all the way around, not just on a little piece like this, and you're going to put it on the seam edge, okay? So not on the quilt, you're doing it on the, you can see there's the stitching, there's the seam edge there, and you can do it all the way around, but I would iron this first and then fold your fabric over, and your quilter's tape, look at that, it's fabulous stuff, just holds that down while you top stitch. The other option is to stitch your binding on the back and take it over to the front and top stitch to make that neat. But you'll end up with it looking beautiful like that. You can just about see my silver thread. So I'm really pleased with how that's turned out. I'm going to go away and finish this now. So this is Dixie. This is Dixie. So I'm going to go and finish the binding, and we can't leave it like this. But you got the idea. Look at that. Isn't that gorgeous? You got the idea of what it looks like. Oh, is the little animals the right way up? Yeah. So there we are. That's Dixie. And this is the original version here that I popped together for the pattern. And I did, you can see geometric quilting on that. Placed the squares slightly differently, but I think this second method is better. And don't forget to download it on my website, lizzycurtis.com. It's a PDF document that can be downloaded worldwide, so there's no problems with that. And I hope you make loads.